the next question, he asks, the New Left movements that emerged on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1960s proved incendiary to the notion of the end of ideology. Can you explain this notion and the role it played in galvanizing New Lefts? The fantasy of the end of ideology was tied to a fleeting historical moment, namely Western Europe and North America's golden age of democratic capitalism after World War II. Sociologists like Daniel Bell and Raymond Aron argued that factors such as material prosperity, historically low rates of wealth inequality, and an array of social services administered by the welfare state combined to render ideological conflicts obsolete. A basic consensus on democracy and regulated capitalism had been reached, which meant that political disputes could be resolved by pragmatic compromise or technocratic administration. I examine how this idea played out in the European center-left parties starting in the late 1950s in a process I call social democratic modernization. Center-left parties such as the West German SPD shifted away from working-class politics, abandoned Marxism as a guiding theory, adopted an American-style campaign model, and generally assimilated to the conditions of democratic capitalism. Left socialist critics like Wolfgang Abendroth and Ossip K. Fleckheim pointed out that this end of ideology reflected the momentary boom of post-war capitalism and assumed the permanence of the welfare state. Just like Edward Bernstein's revisionism at the turn of the century, social democratic modernization was predicated on a partial phase of historical development. The end of ideology actually represented the triumph of another kind of ideology: rigid adherence to liberal democratic norms, denial of class conflict, fixation on totalitarian dictatorship as the greatest evil, and a praise of free enterprise, which is like the ISO minus the praise of free enterprise. A line from the SPD's 1959 party program sums up this post-ideological pragmatism: competition as much as possible, planning as much as necessary.
It's so funny.
Ultimately, the 1960s New Left would reject the end of ideology for its disavowal of social antagonisms and its stifling of anti-systemic opposition. As the U.S. sociologist C. Wright Mills put it in his Letter to the New Left, which he addressed to the British group in 1960, let the old men ask sourly, out of apathy, into what? The age of complacency is ending. Let the old women complain wisely about the end of ideology. We are beginning to move again.
So again, I think this is... Oh, go ahead, Jason. I can see your mouth is open.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
Okay, well, this end of ideology moment in which this kind of new post-war Bernsteinism, I suppose. I don't know if that's fair to call it that, but I see the link.
Yeah.
Because I think Jason's gone into this and elsewhere about the sort of complexity of Bernsteinism, but the end of ideology actually represented the triumph of another kind of ideology: rigid adherence to liberal democratic norms, denial of class conflict, fixation on totalitarian dictatorship, blah blah blah. So he's talking about the New Left responding to that, rejecting that, but it also describes the left that we live in and with.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting how it kind of proves one of the premises of the article, that it becomes what it's fighting against.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I don't even have anything to add to that. I just think the end of ideology is correct. Maybe it didn't happen quite as quickly, but I think it's really when people talked at the time about the end of ideology, they were talking about something real. And with the neoliberal turn, in the ways in which the old ideology of the old left just couldn't keep up, and so the New Left became the only thing in town, and they became just a prop of the system. It became half of the system, and now ideology is like, it's a matter of personal consumption. Mm-hmm. So I think we are beginning to move again. That's incorrect.
Well, I mean, thrashing around and just bumping into stuff is moving.
Yeah, I guess so.
I want to clarify though. So we're talking about 1960, which arguably precedes the neoliberal turn.
Yeah,
just which comes about, maybe you could argue, early 70s or So
Yeah, right after the last gasp of the height of New Left radicalism.
right.
68, 69 were the really dramatically revolutionary years, whatever.
So
Yeah.
you're doing an interesting move, which is like the end of ideology comes about later in a different kind of incarnation than what sociologists like Daniel Bell are talking about. They're talking about like um, basically a technocratic state with a large, war economy welfare reality makes it so that ideology is kind of moot. But what neoliberalism does is it kind of like shatters all that. It gets rid of all of that security, so that it's ideology is moot in a very different way.
Well, right, it's because what it does is it shows the ideology is moot, because we can come in, break up everything, atomize everything, and no one's going to do anything about it.
Cool.
Rather than state their discontent, their discontentment, and they're going to register the discontent in ways which were unthinkable in a previous era, because in the previous era they might have opposed us, and now they're just going to march around and they're going to go home.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to registering discontent as a mechanism to organize, to leave the protest and go to somebody's house and talk about what to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, part of what gets lost in the post sort of new left moment, the new left of the 1960s moment, is that even there's like a transition. Like the new left of the 1960s is a transition from protests and actions that have demands attached to them to, by the time you get to the end of it, the point is protesting and the demands are like tertiary, right? And then the way that manifests itself is sort of the last gasp of the new left is the Occupy Wall Street movement, which whose slogan was Occupy Everything, Demand Nothing, which was, I don't know, I couldn't have been more disappointed in how stupid the Occupy Wall Street movement was than I was and currently am. But yeah, there's like the further you get away from the old left, the new incarnations of the new left, it's like you distill everything out of it. So there was like the new left moment and the neoliberal moment were sort of like arising at the same time. And the culmination of the new left is the late 1960s, and the the real kicking off point for neoliberalism is in the 1970s. And they really sort of played into each other. Like the new left didn't adopt the spirit of neoliberalism so much as it was just like informed by it. It's like this rejection of institutions, this rejection of everything that was like of the rejection of the institutions, the rejection of parties, the rejection of unions and stuff like that was like really fit in well with neoliberalism. And I think it's not an accident that it's not a coincidence that the new left was completely fucking infiltrated by the FBI and the CIA, like getting people to adopt these like totally just atomizing ideas. And then of course the capitalist class sort of turns that into its primary driver of ideology in the decade like precede or after that. I don't know. That was kind of disjointed. It really was all coming out. My point is that they both fed off of each other. Neoliberalism and new leftism sort of fed off of each other and became like Occupy Wall Street, etc.
Yeah,
I take your point. I'm just remembering about the time when I first met you guys in the ISO. I was reading an old paperback of the New Left Reader, and that kind of illustrates the sort of the fact that the new left's premise that is this very messy catch-all term, because it included people like C. Wright Mills that was just referenced here, who's openly anti-Marxist or critical of Marxism. It had Kolakowski before he abandoned even a critical communist perspective. But it also had Fidel Castro. It also had anti-colonial writers. It had Frantz Fanon. It had all these things that were very elemental to this movement that we call the New Left.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have a criticism in the imperial core of what happens to this New Left, but then you have this whole other range of movements globally that go different directions.
That's another thing that's interesting about the New Left is the sort of like lionization of revolutionary figures while they're creating a revolution, and as soon as they become like established like leaders of their newly revolutionary countries, then they're immediately like kicked to the curb. That's what happens with Castro and Ho Chi Minh, and
you can't have a permanent regeneration, which is you can't like extol the virtue. You can't hold up a leader or a revolutionary government as a paragon of virtue. If you need to be always in opposition, you need to always be the left opposition of whatever there is forever.
Right. It reminds me of that one on Mad Men when Don goes to the poetry reading with the Beatniks, and there's that girl up there that's doing like, I guess it's just her poetry, which was like, I had a dream that Fidel Castro, I made love to Fidel Castro while Nikita Khrushchev watched. Remember that?
Yeah.
And Don is just like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
That's the right reaction.
I know. I was always like, gross, man. I'm identifying with Don in this instance.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start reading again.
Yeah, do it.
All right. So the next question is about how the author was surprised to find out that the Frankfurt School didn't necessarily embrace the New Left, and says that Max Horkheimer tried to keep his subversive writings from the 30s hidden so that the German New Left wouldn't take inspiration from them, and said that Jürgen Habermas accused radical students of flirting with left fascism. And he says, can you explain their reasoning? What would you say that the Frankfurt School would you say that the Frankfurt School was of the old left? Is it true? It is true that Adorno and Horkheimer generally opposed the student movement. They worried about neo-Nazi reaction and thought that the New Left critique of the welfare state might undermine the chances of a social democratic party. They were correct.
They were correct.
Yeah, but it also doesn't mean that the Social Democratic Party didn't need to be criticized and undermined. It's just that, the whole throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing.
Yeah.
Moreover, the confrontational tactics of the extra-parliamentary opposition, which sometimes involved destroying property and provoking the police, plus the theory of direct action that justified those tactics, led Habermas to accuse the New Left of left fascism. And Habermas is just such a fucking like wet fart of a philosopher, just a total dud.
You're destroying property and provoking the police like fascists.
He used that term only once in a heated exchange at a public meeting in 1967 and inspired the mediocre to continually quote him forever. No, that was my addition.
I was like, I don't remember reading that.
And soon he yielded to criticism and recanted. It should be noted that Habermas was more sympathetic to the New Left than his older colleagues Adorno and Horkheimer. The contradiction between the radicalism of Frankfurt School theory and the relative moderation of its politics may be explained in part by its members' bourgeois class position as university professors and by their generational affinity for the old left. The example of Marcuse does reveal the limits of that explanation, since he famously declared solidarity with the New Left, championed the cause of marginalized groups everywhere, and mentored Angela Davis. He showed that it was possible to unite radical theory and practice. I do not, however, define the New Left as an intellectual current or a set of radical ideas that may or may not have been realized in practice. Instead, I examine the historical succession of new lefts that shared an obsession with organizational form and broke with the existing old social democratic and communist lefts. The Frankfurt School was not new left in this definition. because it neither engaged in political struggle nor emphasized internal democracy within its own organization. Because of this lack of direct political engagement, I do not consider the Frankfurt School an old left either. In the Weimar Republic, in exile during the Nazi regime, and again in West Germany, it was always a privately endowed Marxist institute affiliated with the university. Its research agenda aligned with the left, but otherwise it led a bourgeois existence. In my opinion, the history of new lefts cannot be understood purely as intellectual history. Apart from Lukács, the workers, intellectuals, and worker intellectuals that I profile in this book were not very famous. Neo-leftists tried to realize their theories of new forms in social activism and political work. I interpret their various sorts of Marxism and anarchism as low theory, that is, critiques of existing society that were developed for the strategic purpose of political mobilization, as distinct from the more sophisticated high theory of the Frankfurt School. Neo-leftist theory was always embedded in radical organizations.
I like this sentence. Its research agenda aligned with the left, but otherwise it led a bourgeois existence. I think I would just say that that's what it means to have your research agenda align with the left. That's what it means to be left, but not to be of the workers' movement.
Yes.
It means to lead a bourgeois existence. Bourgeois in this case does not mean, that's not like another way of saying you order oysters Rockefeller. It's like bourgeois in the sense that you do not oppose and challenge the bourgeois social order, even if you have a left criticism of it.
I wasn't familiar with this distinction between high theory and low theory, but it makes sense.
I kind of intuitively understand it without ever really having
it makes
discussed it before, yeah.
It makes perfect sense that a lot of the Frankfurt School, and certainly the leftist psychoanalysis that comes out of continental philosophy and so on, is high theory. That makes sense to me, but I like this term low theory. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like the difference between high church theology and low church theology, right?
Yeah.
It maps on pretty well.
It makes me think of that big Bill Haywood. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but he said, "I've never read Capital, but I've bled it from head to toe," or whatever.
No, he said, "I've never read Marx's Capital, but I bear the marks of capital all over my body."
Ooh, that's thank you.
Yeah, that's a pretty baller quote.
Yeah,
I like that. That is low theory that you just feel viscerally. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Well, we have 2 more sections. I guess we should finish it.
Yeah.
Okay. False alarm. Baby cries for no reason sometimes.
Take us home, Chris.
All right. Some critics suggest that the New Left shares some kind of affinity with neoliberalism. Oh, hey!
I know that person.
Yeah. For instance, the neoliberal notion of the entrepreneurial self, the idea that the market gives us the ultimate freedom to constantly recreate ourselves, seems to share something in common with the New Left's rejection of external control, hierarchy, and bureaucracy. Indeed, both neoliberalism and the New Left embrace the positive role of spontaneous forces. What do you make of this connection, if anything? And I would say that, before we read this next part, to make my point clear, is I think that they came up at the same time based on just the same feelings of rejection of old models that just so happens to really coincide with one another. And then, of course, it didn't hurt that the FBI was writing leftist theory at the time.
Yeah, I think it really matters that if we are to think of the communist project as the conscious stepping forward along the train tracks of history, from the Enlightenment through the bourgeois era into the communist future, and that everything is a building block from one to the next, it shouldn't surprise us at all if the popular discontentment with the bureaucratically ordered society of capital in the immediate post-war years is reflected both inside and outside of let's call it the left, inside and outside of the rejection of capitalism as a whole. Also, I just think that if we think about what it really means for everything to kind of just be iterations of what is, that modernity is a series of contradictory developments playing themselves out. And fascism and liberalism and communism are all expressions of modernity. Neoliberalism and neo-leftism, or whatever new leftism, should also be seen as expressions of the part of modernity that which won out over communism and fascism. These are all parts of the same thing. The idea here should be that the communist project is trying to not just be the next step, or it should try to not be the next step anyways.
I agree that a strange symmetry exists between neo-leftism and neoliberal capitalism. Both involve the processes of creative destruction, both value spontaneity, both historically have been hostile to bureaucracy and the state. Okay, sure.
In a sense. In a qualified sense.
Yeah. The historical disunity of the left, which new lefts seem to exacerbate, looks suspiciously like the atomization of society brought on by a neoliberal privatization, union busting, and austerity since the 1970s. I disagree with critics who claim that the anti-authoritarianism of the new left somehow caused neoliberalism, or was itself already neoliberalism in sheep's clothing. It's much more dialectical than that, but, Such criticism stems from nostalgia for the welfare state and the social democratic and communist old left, which is understandable today when those things have mostly vanished. But nostalgia makes for bad history. The anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist orientation of the 1960s new left is undeniable. Actual neoliberals, meanwhile, worked to encase capitalist markets against democratic control and to prevent any global redistribution of wealth after the formal end of empire, as the historian Quinn how do you say that? Slobodian has shown. Aside from these stark ideological differences between neo-leftism and neoliberalism, historical new lefts tried to practice internal democracy within their own organizations and prefigure a future life based on collective freedom. I also disagree with the sociologists like Luke Boltanski and Yves Chiapello, among others, who claim that the new lefts articulated an aesthetic or cultural critique of capitalism without challenging its socioeconomic foundation. Well, I
don't think I do disagree.
I don't either. I would say that... I'll continue this. This claim stems from the conflation of the new left and the 1960s countercultural in general.
What?
And that's bad. Why? On the one hand, the highly political new left should be distinguished from what historian Fred Turner has referred to in the U.S. context as the new communalists, or the hippies, and other utopians who sought to escape politics altogether by cultivating emancipated lifestyles in separatist communes. They were part of the new left also. They were just the part that sucked real bad, and it sucks to associate them with it. Yeah. On the other hand, neo-leftists who cared about countercultural did so because they recognized the connection between the cultural forms, political forms, and economic forms. Going back to Lukács, this recognition derived from a Marxist concept of totality that viewed all social forms as dialectically related. If culture, or politics, or economics appeared as separate domains, that was due to their reification and fetishization under capitalism. From Reich to Marcuse, this influence of psychoanalysis on neo-leftist theory and practice also drove home the point that class politics needs sexual politics. In other words, when integrated into a revolutionary product, the countercultural is the political. And that's precisely what the hippies were, right?
Yeah.
The history of every modern revolution has included a cultural revolution of one sort or another. Although operating on a smaller scale and with less success, the new left was no exception.
It's true. If we look at the Bolsheviks in the early days, it's the difference is that they were doing it inside of a socialist state.
Right.
Right. The difference is that they were doing it as a result of, as a conscious next part of revolutionizing society, because they had captured state power as a result of contending for state power.
In contrast to the industrial working class base of the old left, the 60s new left was largely an affair of the educated middle-class youth. This is the main reason why it has become a target of criticism by some leftists today. but it should come as no surprise that neo-leftist demographics would track material developments in advanced capitalism. The shape of the 60s New Left reflected the conditions of an emerging post-industrial society in which universities, perhaps for the first time, became major sites of production and not merely centers for transmission of cultural heritage. As advanced economies shifted toward highly skilled technical and professional work, university education became more socially necessary. Thus, the sociologist Alain Touraine could interpret the French student revolts of 1968 as a symptom of a broader crisis, which pitted future professionals and post-industrial technicians against what appeared to them as an obsolete structure of industrial relations. State-funded research into military technology and area studies, which was the most prevalent in the United States, also made the Cold War university into a site of broader social contestation. These factors combined with the increasing pace of decolonization on Europe's colonial periphery, including Vietnam, to give the New Left its anti-imperialist and student-led character.
So what I don't see is how that is distinct from the economic changes which eventually culminate in what's called neoliberalism. All he's saying here is that, yes, the old format of class struggle didn't make as much sense to the newly emerging in the newly emerging economies of the core. That's it. It's like, okay, the reason why there was a student new left versus a working class old left is first of all, it's not entirely true. But the reason why we can make that clean division is because the old left did not capture the moment. Like the 1968 revolts in Paris were not just student revolts. Mm-hmm. They're only remembered as that because that part you can that's the recuperable part.
Right.
That's the part that says we just want freedom, man. But the part where the workers at the Renault factory said we want to own this, and also we want a government of the communist socialist parties. That's the part that's inconvenient for any historian of the New Left, whether they're pro or anti, if they think of it as only a student movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of what gets left out is the general strike, and, the largest general strike in the history of France to that point.
Yeah.
And like the collapse of the government, which fled into exile before being neutered and defanged by the communist and social democratic parties and the trade unions.
Right. It's really important to emphasize the actions of the French Communist Party.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the New Left was reacting against real problems in the Old Left. Absolutely. And that's, clearly something that needed to happen. But I think, write off the connection between neoliberalism and the iterations of the New Left that followed the rise of neoliberalism, I think is mistaken. I think there's a dialectical relationship between the New Left and neoliberalism as it exists from the early 1970s moving forward. I think that the institutions sort of internalize the parts of New Leftism that can be recuperated most easily and fit in the best with neoliberalism, like the writings of Foucault specifically, right? And and other sort of like post-communist kind of critiques of power, and like Antonio Gramsci's indecipherable prison notebooks, as opposed to his like clear theoretical writings. Those things get taken into the institutions and used as relatively benign critiques of power that don't actually challenge the dominance of the neoliberal order. And in fact, reinforce it.
I have a sort of comment that is probably beyond the purview of this discrete investigation, but one of the main, but I think it's in the background, which is like he mentions the state-funded research into military technology and area studies. That is something that the New Left is pushing against, and rightly so. But it's also like the bedrock of the United States welfare and wealth, and its ability to provide what the long lost, free tuition to its ability to provide
Yeah.
public infrastructure and education and so forth, all the things we grieve having lost in the neoliberal era. It's just this fundamentally paradoxical reality. Like, what created all that wealth and made all that redistribution and social programs possible was a war economy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like that's where these struggles are happening in the shadow of that. So of course, the new left is kind of a symptom of that,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Absolutely. No, I mean you're right about that. And that's like it's the dissatisfaction with Fordism, right? That I don't want to work in a factory and belong to a union and go to union meetings, man. That sounds boring. I want to have a revolutionary life where I like smoke weed and lay in the grass all day. That's like a reaction to the fact that life was so comfortable because of the destruction of Europe and a great part of the Pacific as well, and the rebuilding of it by the United States and the wealth that flowed into our country as a result of military spending and Marshall Plan spending by the government. And you're absolutely right. New leftism was made possible by massive destruction in wars in imperialist wars and the Second World War as well, which was sort of like a combination of imperialist war / war against imperialism.
Were you guys following that military parade with Xi Jinping and Putin
in China?
Yeah,
dude, that
commemorate
was
the 80th.
actually, yeah, the 85th anniversary, or no, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Yeah, dude, the Chinese military is massive and impressive. It's pretty. It should be scary looking to anyone who thinks that China is going to take over as world hegemon and turn us all into, supplicants. I don't think that, so I'm not scared of it. It just, someone was talking about how you can compare the parade in China to the parade in Washington D.C.
Oh yeah,
and then see who the new world hegemon is going to be.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
I love hearing from people who are like, "No, man, we're not gonna show the world our best stuff. Like, we're not gonna like give up the ghost on what we have in our arsenal." Isn't that the whole point of the parade, is to flex?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Anyway.
This is the best question. That's why Occupy Wall Street was the best.
In the epilogue of your book, you talk fondly of Occupy Wall Street's General Assembly for its collective decision-making. In what sense do you see this as the legacy of the New Left movements of the 1960s? Well, you guys all know about why I think it's the legacy of the New Left movements of the 1960s. It's basically like how dogs eat their own vomit? Eventually they've got to crap out that vomit that they ate. And that's what I think the Occupy Wall Street was of the iterations of the New Left. Anyway, Occupy Wall Street and other global uprisings of 2011 marked a resurgence of anti-capitalist energy and popular mobilization outside any existing party structures, taking the form of democratic assemblies. Nope, democratic is wrong. Those things were anti-democratic. They were consensus.
Yeah.
One person could block the entire thing by holding up their hand.
Yeah.
Anyway, these movements of squares shared an emphasis on the horizontal or non-hierarchical organization, or lack thereof. The dilemmas that Occupy and related movements faced as they tried to sustain their new forms against the forces of entropy, institutional co-optation, and police repression repeated many of the dilemmas faced by the 60s New Left. It's almost as if they shouldn't have maybe tried to do the exact same thing over or something. I don't know. But a great chasm separates us from the historical New Left of the early to mid-20th century. Gone are the mass workers' parties that once underpinned the social democracies and communist lefts, insofar as those ever existed in the U.S., which I think is an asinine comment. There were 100,000 fucking members of the Socialist Party. Eugene Debs got like up to 6% of the fucking total vote in the United States, insofar as they existed.
85,000 members of the Communist Party and like another couple million in front organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, insofar as they existed, which is to say,
As they existed.
yeah,
But we
Right.
could compare in a per capita way that to other major countries like France or Italy. We can sort of charitably read it.
Yes.
Read it.
Sure. This guy is primarily Europe, focuses on the New Left in Europe. So yeah, to him, the United States probably pales in comparison to like the just regular ass daily politics of social democracy in Europe. Also gone is the anything like the high labor union density that characterized earlier periods of capitalist development. Despite Striketober and renewed labor militancy, remember Striketober, guys?
Yeah,
that was a better time. And renewed labor militancy in the U.S. and elsewhere, we have lost that all-encompassing world of labor that once defined the habitus of the left. In short, the old left ceased to exist in the last quarter of the 20th century, and nothing like it has been rebuilt since. The new lefts need the fertile soil of mass parties and unions in which to germinate and grow. Without that benefit of the old left, new lefts cannot exist as I have defined them. And that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's definitely true, yeah.
Yeah, that I think is like the best point that this guy makes in this interview. Is like there's no point in being a permanent opposition if there's nothing to oppose. And that's, I think, the trap that something like the ISO fell into before it graciously self-deleted.
Yes.
I had a dream the other night that the ISO was still going, but it's like a splinter group, which I guess you could argue is true. They're just in the DSA, but
well, I mean, there are also like little groups based around publications that continue like the heresy of Cliffism, and all of its myriad of sub heresies.
But I guess the ISO lives on through Haymarket Books, which is a worthwhile project in many.
Sure, that's
many
one of the
respects.
positive legacies of the ISO. I think is Haymarket Books for sure. One of the less positive legacies is definitely the pro NATO stance taken by the couple of publications that I can think of.
Yeah, and I know that there was at one point a splinter, like International Socialist Continuity Group, the International Socialism Project. Yeah, and they have articles by names who I definitely recognize.
All right. In your studies of the New Left, what is one of the features of it that you find most relevant for today, and one that is most problematic?
I would say they're the same.
The most problematic,
which is the most relevant, is the most problematic.
Right. The most problematic feature of the historical New Lefts was their focus on sustaining internal democracy at the expense of seizing power or instituting lasting changes to the social order. There we go. That's a good answer.
Yeah. But it's not.
both
But again,
questions.
it's not. You have to define what sustaining internal democracy fucking means. Because if you're having an interminable consensus process, that's not even democratic.
No, not at all. Small groups at the margins of mass parties and unions were able to recognize authoritarian tendencies within those old lefts and sometimes initiate beneficial process of self-criticism and reform. But on their own, neo-leftist small groups often succumb to political isolation. Most relevant for us today was the way that historical New Lefts nourished the ecosystem of anti-systemic opposition. New Lefts always existed in productive tension with the social democratic and communist Old Left, introducing new forms of organization besides the party or the union. Neo-leftists often pass through radical phases in their youth before settling into moderate politics later in life. So the dialectic of New Lefts and Old Lefts also help build intergenerational continuity. Yeah, but at what cost?
Yeah.
Solidarity between generations and diversity of organizational forms are crucial components for the climate movement especially. Young radicals often get maligned as naive idealists and even as dangerous spoilers of institutional reform. But the time for gradual reform has passed. The climate emergency requires radical action now, and by any means necessary. Too often, older people in positions of authority within the progressive movement or the responsible parties of reform fail to yield power when the situation demands it. Now is the time to yield to future generations. Our capacity to begin anew, as Hannah Arendt once wrote, is what saves human affairs from natural ruin.
Yeah, that's you probably could pick a better quotation to end on.
I mean,
but also,
true.
This
It's true.
Older people in positions of authority within the progressive movement. There's a whole lot more at issue here than just the fact that the author is quoting Hannah Arendt, as a last word. It's also the idea, and this is latent within and all throughout, but the idea of the progressive movement or progressive movements, which are still just the continuity of what is,
right?
But better. And if that's all we mean by left, I mean, then that is all we have by left. Yeah, I think this is a good initial discussion about this topic, but I think that there's just so much more here.
There's also okay, it's true, or it's a truism that the time for gradual reform is past. We got to which is to say, we have to act now. But I think that doesn't mean anything unless what we're talking about by acting now is beginning to build the party. And by the party, I mean something that can become mass-based, and I'm going to say populist, in the sense that it is not progressive or left, but it is class-based. It is, and we could call it socialist as well, but something that is geared toward the working class, which includes all of the deplorables as well.
Exactly. Yes. And I would say that's not like what progressives need to accomplish. I think that's what we need to accomplish, whether there are any progressives, capital P, that come with us or not. It's a different question.
The other takeaway from this final answer is that we started the conversation talking about it. The opposition is wholly dependent on the institution it's opposing. It can't exist on its own. It's that way leads to just kind of this alternative reality. The new left. So this part of this makes me think of Chomsky's old thing about how the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a victory for socialism. That kind of has a false premise that it was the new left and the oppositional left that made the Soviet Union crumble, right? Or that defeated the evil empire of Stalinist communism. That's not what happened. It was actually it was the Soviet Union and the other state socialist entities that made the third way possible, that made Cuba possible, that made all of the other left projects globally possible. The ones that
made European social democracy that everyone wants to copy so bad over here.
So it's there's just this paradox to the new left's very premise. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that I really feel like there's a dismissal of the cultural wing of neoliberalism and how that meshes so well with new leftism. Even while new leftism didn't necessarily say, well, we think that the government should use the military to go into other countries and open up markets that then we can say are free markets and then abolish trade barriers between them. Yeah, of course, the new left didn't say that stuff explicitly, but there's a cultural neoliberalism that exists as part of the political and economic project of neoliberalism, meshes very well with this sort of anti-authoritarian, institution, pro-individual sort of atomized version of leftism that the new left became in its later iterations. They feed off of each other really well. And I think that this permanent sort of opposition to, yeah, sure, I agree with criticisms of capitalism, but I am against the idea of us having any kind of organization that might be capable of fighting against it. That it's super safe.
Because I'm against being told what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm against bedtime, and I'm against not being able to eat like fucking ice cream for every meal. I'm yeah. I mean, it's there's a very particularly American liberal sort of cultural affect, I think, that meshes with neoliberalism, and it's why it took off so well here, and it's something that was bequeathed to us by the British, right? And it
Yeah.
really shows itself in our politics, be they left politics or mainstream politics.
Yeah. And I also just think that, like, there are elements of, rather than saying we want to revive the old left or we should revive the new left and just not do what they did before, we have to recognize that, I don't know, like, well, okay, I want to read a quote, or I want to read a passage. For Hegel, only the whole is true. Every stage or phase or moment is partial and therefore partially untrue. Hegel's grand idea is totality, which preserves within it each of the ideas or stages that is overcome or subsumed. Overcoming or subsuming is a developmental process made up of moments. The totality is the product of that process, which preserves all of its moments as elements in a structure, rather than as stages or phases. And so I think if all we're trying to do is find our favorite stage and then return to that, that's a fool's errand. We're not going to do anything. Rather, instead, we should say, okay, this next stage, this next phase, first of all, how is it taking shape? And what can be learned from how the last one and the one before that took shape? And I don't think I know the answer to that, though.
Well, bummer.
I don't know. I just think we also have to get over this sort of inherited. I'm not saying we should become presentist, but like, we have to admit that what I said earlier. There isn't a left institution of any great magnitude that we can be in opposition to. We have to build it.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that can't be put off. And the way we build it is not a recreation,
Well, right, and the way we build it is not so that we can then constitute a pole of opposition to it, like the Trotskyists who talk about the need to build a social democratic party so that we can enter it and become the left wing. Like, we don't need to try again at what we already did do, but we do need to build the thing which we hope to not have to oppose. We do need to build a thing which can serve as what the old left organizations once served to be. Hopefully we won't have to just go through the new left phase as well.
Well, I was thinking about, the depressing legacy of Occupy from what Chris was talking about. And I think maybe one exception that I found promising, and maybe this is the complex sort of paradox of the diffuse arrangement that it was based on, is how it brought in people who were not of the left, people who they were neophytes. There were lots of people in those encampments that were not progressives. They weren't leftists, socialists, communists, or even anarchists. They were just people. Sometimes they were libertarians. Sometimes they were just people knew fuck all. But I think that was kind of interesting, how there was a space where those silos were overcome. They were not ultimately overcome, but there were inroads into talking to one another around class. It's just that there weren't any class demands.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I always say about like I use the Trotsky analogy of the piston box necessary to turn the great outbursts of steam into something useful. Like, sure, like it's great that there was a big outpouring of steam, right? But like all that does is, if it's not channeled into something, it doesn't drive anything forward. It just makes it humid. That's not helpful for anyone. Like, I think that there were things that were accomplished by Occupy Wall Street, and that was showing us that we do have power and that we can shut things down if we organize. And that's the main lesson of Occupy Wall Street, is that we failed to organize and we failed to change things.
And we also have to organize institutions. We can't just organize in a kind of circular, localized. I mean, we do need to organize locally, but we have to build something that can outlive our organizing, that can be used by other people.
We have to like think globally, but like act locally.
God damn it! Okay, I'm turning this off.
And be the change that we want to see in the world.
Coexist, but imagine as I say that, you can see like all of the symbols of the different religions and shit.
They're all just hammer and sickles now.
Yeah, coexist, except for it's all just hammer and sickles and like no letters.
Рабочие и крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас. Без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, принудить к труду,